47 minutes. That's the number. Write it down if you need to. Say it out loud. 47 minutes between the first call and the moment a patrol unit finally pulled up to a house in the unincorporated part of the county where two people had been screaming for help. The couple's names were Harold and Patricia Simmons. He was 71. She was 68. They had lived in that house for 34 years. They had painted the shutters themselves. They knew their neighbors by first name. Harold had spent 3 decades working inside county government, helping design the very emergency response protocols that were supposed to protect people, exactly like him. That night, the protocols failed. The first call came in at 11:09 p.m. A neighbor reported loud sounds, breaking glass, men's voices she didn't recognize. The call was received, logged, assigned a priority code. The second call came 17 minutes later. Patricia herself, her voice compressed by pain into something barely recognizable as speech. The third call came from Harold, who had crawled to the phone with a hip that was already fractured in 2 places. 47 minutes, 3 calls, 1 address, and 1 dispatcher, sitting in a room with 14 colleagues, 8 active consoles, and a supervisor 15 feet away, who received every single one of those calls and chose each time to do nothing. She wasn't distracted. She wasn't incompetent. Her call response times were above average. Her performance reviews were spotless. In 6 years on the job, she had never once been formally written up. She was, by every measurable metric the county used, a good dispatcher. She was also, by that point, 15 months into an arrangement that paid her to make sure certain addresses received emergency response that was always a little too slow, always a little too late, always just delayed enough that nothing could be caught in progress. She had $80,000 in cash hidden in a shoebox behind her daughter's winter clothes. She had 11 minutes left in her shift, and somewhere in a hospital across town, Harold Simmons was telling a doctor that he wanted the name of whoever had been on the other end of those calls. He said it quietly. He said it the way a man says something he intends to follow through on. He did follow through. That's where this story ends. But it's not where it begins. The Millbrook County Emergency Communications Center operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year, including holidays. There are no windows. The overhead lights run on a cycle designed to reduce eye strain during overnight shifts. A soft, even fluorescence that makes it impossible to tell 3 in the afternoon from 3 in the morning. The room smells like recycled air and burnt coffee. There are 14 consoles arranged in 2 rows, each one a small universe of screens and headsets and keyboards worn smooth from years of use. On any given overnight shift, those consoles handle an average of 340 calls. Domestics, medicals, car accident, structure fires. People who call 911 because they are frightened and have nowhere else to turn. The people sitting at those consoles make decisions in under 4 seconds. Not educated guesses. Decisions. Priority code 1 means a unit rolls immediately. Priority code 3 means the call enters a queue. The difference between those 2 codes can be the difference between a person who survives the night and a person who doesn't. The dispatchers know this. They are trained to know this. It is the first thing they learn and the last thing they forget. She had been sitting at console 7 for 6 years. She was 32, medium height. She kept a travel mug of green tea on the left side of her keyboard and a photograph of her daughter tucked into the corner of her monitor. Not taped, just slipped in at an angle so it was visible only to her. The little girl in the photograph was 7 years old and missing her 2 front teeth. Her supervisor, a man named Orville, who had been in dispatch for 30 years, sat 15 feet away. He was a careful, experienced professional who had seen everything the job could produce. He noticed the travel mug. He noticed the photograph. He did not notice anything else. Her performance metrics were the best on the floor that quarter, and underneath her keyboard, tucked into a small gap between the console housing and the desk edge, was a personal phone set to silent, vibration only. A specific pattern, 2 short pulses, 1 long, that she could feel against her wrist without looking down. She had programmed that pattern herself. She had been using it for 9 months. Investigators would later reconstruct the timeline from phone records, deleted message threads, and the testimony of a patrol officer named Kendrick, who accepted full immunity in exchange for cooperation. The first contact between them appears unremarkable in the data. A shift change, a cup of coffee from the break room vending machine, a conversation that lasted, according to building security logs, approximately 11 minutes. He asked about her daughter. She asked about his precinct transfer. Neither of them said anything that would have meant anything to anyone listening. His name appears 14 times in her personal phone records over the following 6 weeks. The 14th contact is where the record changes. Nobody becomes corrupt all at once. That's the detail that gets lost in the way these stories are usually told. The version where someone makes a choice, and the choice is obviously wrong, and they make it anyway because they are, at their core, a bad person. That version is easier. It requires less from the audience. The actual version is slower. A patrol officer asks if you can check whether an arrest report has been filed yet. Not change it, not delete it, just look. You have access to the CAD system, the computer-aided dispatch records that log every call, every unit, every response. You can see everything. You check. You tell him. He thanks you. Nothing happens. No money changes hands. It is, by any reasonable measure, the kind of thing that happens between colleagues in the same building 100 times a week. 3 weeks later, he comes back. Different request. A man he knows is expecting parole officers and wants to understand the pattern of their welfare checks. The days, the times, the rhythm. He doesn't need the parole records. He needs the dispatch logs. You pull them up, 3 welfare checks over 6 months, all on Wednesdays, all between 10 and noon. You tell him, he hands you an envelope. Inside is $500 in cash. He says it's a thank you. His friend just wants to make sure he's home when they arrive. Nothing sinister, just a man trying to stay compliant with the terms of his supervision. The letter from your car insurance company is sitting on the kitchen counter at home next to your daughter's spelling homework. You're 2 weeks past due. You take the envelope. You tell yourself the distinction matters between information and interference, between reading a screen and changing what's on it. You build the distinction carefully, the way you'd build anything you intend to live inside. That night, you sleep fine. The next morning, Kendrick texts to say thank you again. You text back anytime. You didn't build a criminal enterprise. You built a budget, a real one. The kind that accounts for every dollar coming in and every dollar that has to go out before the month ends. The kind that gets revised at 2 in the morning when the electric bill is higher than expected and the car makes a sound it didn't make last week. You had been building that budget, revising it, losing sleep over it for 5 years. Since the divorce, since the savings account disappeared and the good car disappeared, and what remained was a 2-bedroom apartment in a complex where the hallway smelled like other people's cooking and a 4-year-old who needed things children need. Food, warmth, stability, the sense that the person responsible for her was not quietly drowning. The budget never balanced, not once in 5 years. Then Kendrick introduced you to a bail bondsman named Vincent. Vincent needed to know when bench warrants were issued before they hit the public system. $300 per name. He usually had 3 or 4 names a month. Then a defense attorney named Lena Park, who wanted real-time awareness of active operations so she could advise her clients on timing. $200 per call, sometimes 6 calls a week. Then a private investigator who needed address histories pulled from dispatch logs. $150 each. Bulk pricing for anything over 10. Each transaction was small. Each one felt like a problem solved rather than a line crossed. By month 4, you were clearing an extra $3,200 a month, not life-changing money in the abstract. Transformative money in the specific. Your daughter moved to a daycare with an actual curriculum. Phonics, basic arithmetic, structured outdoor time. Instead of a television mounted in the corner of a room that smelled like mildew, you paid off the credit card that had been carrying a balance since the week your husband left. You bought groceries without doing the calculation in your head before you reached the register. You replaced her winter coat. She had outgrown the old one 3 months earlier and had been wearing it anyway, the sleeves stopping 2 inches above her wrists. And you had told yourself it was fine, it was temporary. You would fix it soon. You fixed it. These are the details that don't make it into the indictment. The coat, the daycare. The first morning you bought coffee without checking your bank balance first. At what point does a transaction become a crime? She had an answer. You probably have one too. They are not the same answer. For 15 months, she was the best dispatcher in the building. Her numbers said so. Her supervisor's notes said so. The quarterly review that Orville filed in month 11 gave her the highest accuracy rating on the floor and noted specifically that her call handling under pressure was exceptional. He used the word exceptional. It is still in her personnel file. The people who paid her said she was exceptional too, just for different reasons. Investigators would later reconstruct her parallel operation from 847 deleted text messages, 3 burner phone records, and the financial disclosures of 4 cooperating witnesses. What they found was not chaos. It was architecture, a system built from the available materials, institutional access, institutional trust, and the institutional assumption that a dispatcher with clean metrics had nothing to hide. Her legitimate calls received, logged, prioritized, dispatched within standard windows. Her other calls, received on the phone beneath the desk, processed one-handed during slow periods, deleted before the shift ended, left hand on the console, right hand on everything else. The code she developed with Kendrick before his transfer was simple enough to memorize and ambiguous enough to mean nothing to anyone reading over her shoulder. A number in a text meant a case file. A street name meant a dispatch history. A first name meant a person lookup. She had expanded the code herself over time, adding entries as the network grew, the way you expand a vocabulary when you move to a country where you intend to stay. Orville sat 15 feet away. He noticed nothing because there was nothing visible to notice. This is the detail that made the internal review team go quiet when they first saw her performance data laid alongside the anomaly map. Not because she had hidden her activity behind poor performance, because she had hidden it behind excellent performance. The corruption wasn't detectable in what she did wrong. It was invisible inside everything she did right. She hadn't built a trap. She had built plumbing, functional, unremarkable, load-bearing infrastructure that the people around her used every day without thinking about what was running through the walls. Then Vincent asked for something different. Not information, action. He had a client who had skipped bail and was hiding at a known address. He needed 30 minutes of guaranteed delayed response, long enough for his people to arrive first. He offered $5,000. She had never been offered that much for a single job. Her daughter needed dental work. 2 crowns, $2,800. Her insurance had classified them as cosmetic. She said yes. The call came in at 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday. A neighbor, female, mid-50s, voice steady but tight in the way voices get when someone has been awake for an hour deciding whether to call. She said she could hear furniture breaking. She said she heard men's voices she didn't recognize. She said it had been going on long enough that she'd checked the time twice before picking up the phone. You took the call. You logged it. You assigned it a priority code of 3. The nearest unit was 4 minutes away. At priority 3, the response window expanded to 40 minutes. You watched the call enter the queue and stay there, the way a stone stays at the bottom of water. Visible if you look directly at it, easy to stop seeing if you look at anything else. 2:34 a.m., the neighbor called back. More sounds. E3, breaking glass now. Someone screaming. She couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. She said it was the kind of screaming that stopped sounding like a person after a while. You told her units were en route. You were looking at the screen when you said it. The words came out in the same tone you used for everything. Measured, professional, the voice of a system functioning correctly. The units were not en route. 2:52 a.m. You upgraded the call to priority 1, not because of the screaming, because 38 minutes had passed and Vincent's people needed time to clear the address, and 38 minutes was enough. You upgraded it the way you'd close a tab you'd finished with. Procedurally, without ceremony. 3:10 a.m. The first unit arrived. The house was empty. Broken furniture, a kitchen chair in 3 pieces in the hallway, a phone pulled from the wall, and blood on the kitchen floor. Not a large amount, the kind of amount that is somehow worse than a large amount because it implies mobility, implies that whoever left it had been moved, or had moved themselves before anyone arrived to ask questions. No bodies, no victim, no suspect. The skip was found 2 days later at the county jail, booked on the original charge, listed in the intake report as having surrendered voluntarily. The medical screening noted a broken nose and bruising across his torso consistent with, and this is the clinical language the report used, a fall. Vincent paid her $5,000 in cash. She deposited $1,000 into her bank account and put the rest in a shoebox in her closet. That should have been the line. Blood on a kitchen floor, a neighbor who called 3 times, a man beaten, while she held the system on a leash and watched the clock. She knew exactly what had happened. She could reconstruct the entire sequence from the dispatch log she had deliberately corrupted. The knowledge sat in her chest that night, like something swallowed wrong, present, specific, impossible to pretend wasn't there. She went home. She made her daughter breakfast. She did not cry. The rationalization came faster now, smoother, like a muscle that had been trained. She had crossed a line she hadn't known she was standing on. He never said her name first. He always said her daughter's. That was the point. The man called himself Darius. No last name offered, none requested, because the kind of conversation this was didn't require last names. He called her personal phone on a Tuesday afternoon in month 9. She didn't recognize the number. She answered anyway because she had developed by that point the habit of answering numbers she didn't recognize. A reflex trained into her by months of operating a second life that required availability. He knew her shift schedule. He knew the name of her supervisor. He knew the daycare her daughter attended, the name of the lead teacher in the morning classroom, and the specific corner of the playground where her daughter preferred to play during outdoor time. He listed these things the way you'd list items on a receipt, calmly, in order, without emphasis. She asked who had given him her number. He said it didn't matter. She asked what happened at the addresses on the specific nights he was describing. He said that didn't matter either. She asked what happened if she said no. He said it would be better for everyone if that question stayed hypothetical. The offer was $4,000 per date, 1 or 2 dates per month, communicated 48 hours in advance. The people he represented valued reliability above everything else, discretion above everything after that. She said yes, not because of the money. By month 9, the money had become almost abstract, numbers that accumulated in shoeboxes and a bolted safe and a storage unit she visited once a month, wealth that existed only in denominations small enough to spend without triggering reports. She said yes because the alternative was a man who knew which corner of a playground her daughter gravitated toward and what he might do with that information if the answer was no. The first date was a Friday, a house in the unincorporated part of the county. She suppressed 2 calls from that address over a 3-hour window. Noise complaints from neighbors, logged as duplicates from a known nuisance address, allowed to die quietly in the system without dispatch. The next morning, the news reported a home invasion, 2 occupants hospitalized. $80,000 in property stolen. She read the article in the daycare parking lot. Her daughter was singing in the back seat, a song she'd learned that week, something about colors. The words not quite right, but the melody intact. She had built a system. The system had been acquired. She was no longer a dispatcher who sold information on the side. She was infrastructure. Harold Simmons spent 30 years working in county government, not in a ceremonial capacity, not in an administrative role that kept him insulated from the actual mechanics of how the county functioned. He worked in emergency services coordination, the division responsible for designing the protocols that governed how calls were received, triaged, and dispatched. He helped write the priority code matrix that every dispatcher in the county was trained on. He helped establish the response time standards that the department measured itself against. He helped build the system. He was inside it when it failed him. His wife Patricia had lived in the house on Clearwater Road for 34 years. She knew which floorboards creaked and which windows stuck in humid weather and which neighbors kept late hours. She had raised 2 children in that house and watched them leave and stayed because leaving had never occurred to her as something she needed to do. The house was not a place she lived. It was the place she was from. After the home invasion, she could not hear the front door open without flinching. That is not a detail that appears in the medical report. The medical report documents a fractured hip and a concussion and a contusion along the left forearm consistent with a defensive wound. The medical report is 4 pages long and does not once use the word afraid. It does not need to. Patricia Simmons had not slept more than 3 consecutive hours since the night it happened, and she would not for a long time after, and no intake form has a field for that. Harold called the sheriff the morning after he was discharged. He was calm. He was precise. He had spent 3 decades in county government, and he knew exactly which words to use and exactly who needed to hear them. He said his 911 call had taken 47 minutes to receive a response. He said his wife had nearly died. He said someone was going to explain to him why the system he had helped build had failed the people it existed to protect. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to in the daycare parking lot across town. She was reading the same news alert on her phone that Harold's daughter had called him about that morning. Her daughter was in the back seat, still singing, still getting the words slightly wrong. 2 realities. One morning, no distance between them at all. She didn't start with the suspect. She started with a spreadsheet. The analyst's name was Reeves. She was 30 30 years old, methodical by temperament and by training, and she had been hired 8 months earlier specifically to audit dispatch operations following a budget increase that funded the position. She had not been hired because anyone suspected anything. She had been hired because the county had money and an unfilled line item and a communications director who believed in data hygiene. Reeves began with the Simmons call and worked backward. What she found over 6 weeks of cross-referencing dispatch logs against incident reports was a pattern that revealed itself the way patterns do when you are looking carefully and without assumption. Not all at once, but incrementally, each data point adjusting the shape of the thing until the shape became undeniable. 11 addresses. 8 months, 911 calls received during specific windows downgraded to low priority. Response times exceeding 40 minutes. All in the unincorporated county. All corresponding to reported crimes within 24 hours of the suppressed calls. She printed 47 pages, highlighted 23 anomalies, circled one operator ID. The operator ID appeared at the intersection of every single irregularity, not exclusively. Now, she had handled hundreds of legitimate calls during the same periods, her accuracy metrics clean, her response times normal, but the delayed calls, the downgraded priorities, the suppressed dispatches, they orbited her shift schedule the way satellites orbit a fixed point, consistent, predictable, invisible, unless you were specifically measuring for them. Reeves brought her findings to the communications director on a Wednesday morning. The director went pale. She called the sheriff's office before noon. The sheriff's office called the State Bureau of Investigation before 3. The SBI assigned 2 agents who specialized in public corruption and had the kind of faces that gave nothing away in any direction. She found out that same Wednesday, not through official channels, through Lena Park, the defense attorney, who had a contact in the sheriff's department and called to warn her with the efficiency of someone managing a liability. The call lasted 4 minutes. Lena Park terminated their arrangement, confirmed she was deleting all communication records, and wished her luck in the tone of someone closing an account that had become inconvenient. That night, she sat at console 7 and dispatched calls for 12 hours. Every keystroke felt like evidence. Every call felt observed. She looked at Orville across the room, reading his phone, same as always, and understood that the thing she had built over 15 months was being mapped in a government building somewhere by a 30-year-old analyst with 47 printed pages and 1 circled operator ID. She did nothing. She went to work. She waited. The arrest happened on a Friday morning, 20 minutes after she dropped her daughter at school. 2 SBI agents and a county detective. They were calm, professional, unhurried in the way people are unhurried when the outcome is already determined. They showed her the warrant. They let her change out of her pajamas. They did not handcuff her in front of her neighbors, which was a courtesy she had not earned but was grateful for in the specific, precise way you are grateful for small dignities when larger ones are no longer available to you. Her mother picked up her daughter that afternoon and told her mommy had to work late. The charges were specific and numerous: official misconduct, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit robbery. 6 counts: bribery, computer fraud, endangerment, each count attached to a suppressed call, a delayed response, a person who had dialed 3 digits and waited for help that she had deliberately withheld. Harold and Patricia Simmons were named in the indictment, so were 9 other victims. Darius was never identified. His phone was a burner. His payments were cash. The crew dissolved into the anonymity that $80,000 in protection money had purchased for them. She was the only visible node in a network designed to be invisible. The prosecution wanted 20 years. Her lawyer argued for 5. They settled on 11. Her daughter was 8 when she went in. She will be 17 when she comes out. She is serving those 11 years in a facility 2 hours from the apartment where her mother, 61 years old, living on disability income, is raising a child in a building that smells like mildew. The cycle she tried to break with dirty money is spinning again in exactly the place it started. Except now her daughter is the one inside it. The drawings keep coming. Houses with large windows, a dog in the yard, a woman standing in a doorway whose face is never quite finished. She tapes them to her wall and does not ask who the figure in the doorway is supposed to be, because the answer might be the one thing she cannot survive knowing. She has 3,287 days left. She does not think about the money anymore. She thinks about 4 minutes, the response time that was already on her screen, the unit that was already 4 minutes away, the button that required nothing from her except the willingness to press it. Each of those 3,287 days is exactly that long. 4 minutes, stretched across years. A sentence inside a sentence, counting down toward a door she is no longer sure anyone will be standing in. If you've watched this far, you already understand there's no clean villain in this story. There's a system, a choice, and a woman who convinced herself the distance between the two was wider than it was. Leave a comment at what point did she lose you? I want to know exactly where that line sits for you, because I think it's different for everyone.